My name is Andy Fleener. I work here at SportsEngine, if that wasn't clear. I'm the platform operations manager at SportsEngine. I manage a team of operations engineers. And so I gave this talk at DevOps Days Portland last week. And I actually included the DevOps Days MSP logo in my talk because as an organizer of that conference, I felt it was important that people know that. So this talk is really about what it's like to join an on-call rotation. I have a team of 8 engineers. There's as well as some security engineers. So we're in the upwards of there's 12 of us. Many of those people started after me. I've been at SportsEngine for it'll be 8 years in December. So all of them started after me. And so I've been through the bringing new people into the organization, acclimating them to what it's like to be on call in this particular location. Right, so SportsEngine. So what is SportsEngine, in case you aren't familiar? We are a SaaS company that provides technology solutions to youth and amateur sports. We were acquired by NBC Sports, so that's why you see the big peacock logo in there. We provide like registration, tournament management, league management solutions to youth sports leagues. So a bit about me. I'm a little weird, so I like to call myself a humanist, and that I care more about the people producing the software than the software itself. Because I think that's how you get the best software, is by thinking it that way. I consider myself a systems thinker, and what that means is I can only see the systems that are around us and everywhere, and that not just the technical systems that we use every day, but the things that make up what it is to be an organization, to be a community, to be a member of a team. These are all driven through systems. And then I consider myself a wannabe resilience engineering enthusiast, mostly because resilience engineering is super academic and I'm not I'm sort of pseudo-academic. I tweeted yesterday that there would be hot takes and PDFs in this talk. That's true. And so a lot of the things that I think about, a lot of the sort of source material for my ideas come from academia and the field of resilience engineering in particular. So there's just a bunch of PhDs that talk about stuff. So I've been in the same on-call rotation for a long time. This is a photo of me shipping code on Lake Minnetonka from the dock before we were about to go out on a boat. And so, yeah, there's some sort of Docker joke in there somewhere. But yeah. All right, so the basic premise of this talk, what is it about? It is about there being no substitution for expertise. So as someone who is new to an on-call rotation, you're never going to have as much experience as someone else who's already been involved, that has been through it before. But there are things that you can do to grow that expertise. But what I really want to say is there's no way to keep you from doing the hard work. So this is the original chop wood, carry water tweet from Andrew Clay Schaefer, 2011. He gave a talk that was literally titled Chop Wood and Carry Water. And what he's trying to say is that there is no magic bullet. It just takes a lot of work. And that work is what actually generates that expertise. So this is another one of my favorite tweets. Liz Fogg-Jones tweeted this recently about how when the run book ends, what do you do then, right? So we talk a lot about documentation and creating this situation where people can follow the run books or the playbooks or whatever you want to call them, but those always end, and then you have to figure out what to do after that. And so I really appreciate the way that Liz phrased this, is the expertise is what takes over after the run books end. So here's where the academic part comes in. So I love this paper. It's called How Complex Systems Fail. It's literally 18 bullet points with a paragraph for each one. It's by Richard Cook, who is a medical doctor, but has also sort of gotten into the software space. He works with John Allspaw at Adaptive Capacity Labs. So there are 18. This is number 1. Complex systems are intrinsically hazardous systems. So there is always failure hiding behind every corner because they are so hazardous. I'm going to go through a few of these. They mostly revolve around the people interacting with these systems. So human operators have dual roles as producers and defenders against failure. So as someone who interacts with a system, you both prevent failure and create it. And there is no way to change that. That is just the state of how it works. All practitioner actions are gambles. Every decision that you make, every action that you take is inherently a gamble. It could pay off, it could not. So the human practitioners are the adaptable element of complex systems. The things that can change and adapt to new circumstances, new emergent behaviors, are the people. We cannot create technical systems that actually do that. Only humans can do that. That is what makes us human. And people continuously create safety. So we continuously make the system more safe by adding new robustness to whatever the system is, by confirming that this person actually knows a thing that you're talking to them about, confirming that those backups actually work. So what? All right. So I love this paper. I love this paper because it's simple. It's very straightforward. All you have to do is, it's 3 pages. It's 2.5 pages. And you can read through all of the descriptions of the various different pieces. And it clearly lays out these ways that complex systems fail, and why they fail, and why that's just a normal thing. So how do you build expertise, right? That's really the question, is how do you actually build that expertise? Those are interrobangs. I love interrobangs. So you can't read this because televisions are small. But so this is from a paper titled "The Construct of Learning Organizations, Dimensions, Measurement, and Validation." And it's really about an academic proof of how learning organizations work. And so that first pillar is people level, and it says, create continuous learning opportunities, promote inquiry and dialogue, encourage collaboration, team learning, empower people towards a collective vision. So that's the people side. Then there's a structural level, connect the organization to its environment. I can't even read it on this screen. Establish systems to capture and share learning. Provide strategic leadership for learning. And so then what do you do with those 2 pillars is that then generates organizational knowledge, which is a thing that you want. It also generates revenue. So it actually impacts directly organizational performance. So this is a thing that these folks in this paper went out to actually prove with data, and this is the hypothesis behind it. And if you read the paper, they basically did. So it's an interesting paper. I highlight it here because creating a learning organization is actually the thing that you're trying to do. Okay. So here's another one of my favorite things, is I like to think about leadership a little bit differently than what you would consider leadership, or like your group of people who are the senior leadership or the managers or whatever you want to call them, executives. I like to think of leadership as an emergent property of the system that moves the organization forward. So anything that an action that someone takes that actually does create movement within the organization is leadership. That can be deciding that there should be a mentorship program. That can be deciding that we won't build systems that use this particular technology. That can be any of those things. You have to go out on a limb and actually suggest to do those things. But what you're doing is moving the organization forward. You're kicking it out of the place that it was. Okay, so there's 2 big disclaimers in this. I had just big disclaimer in the previous version of this. I wanted there to be 2 of them because I want to call them out explicitly. On-call should be compensated. That is the big one. So as an engineer in an on-call rotation, you should get something out of it. For example, at SportsEngine, our on-call engineers get a half day off at the end of their rotation. Compensation is also money, but like it just really depends on your organization, right? But like it's a burden to carry the pager. it is a burden. So somehow you should, as an organization, give something back to the people who hold that burden. All right, the next thing here is this is the Westrom culture model. And so there's a red, a yellow, and a green arrow. And that's really that, like, the things I'm talking about probably don't work very well on this side and work a lot better on this side. So it really depends on your organization. That's the big caveat here. Your organization has to have some sort of tolerance to high cooperation, training messengers, risk or shared, right? Like that has to be the culture of your organization, because that's how you get some of these other things. You can make progress in a bureaucratic organization. You absolutely can, because what you're doing is you're actually pushing it towards that green side as that progress is being made. I would advise against a pathological organization trying anything new, because like that's just how you get fired. So, all right. So this talk is really about definitions of you. And so I wrote this from my perspective as a manager, but I'm actually talking about different perspectives. So I'm talking about you, the engineer, you, the team, and you, the organization. And so each of these things are sort of different levels within the system that you have, you as an actor have agency around, right? So you have influence on any of these things. The first one being you, the engineer, you clearly have influence on. You literally change your behavior and it changes the way that it works. So my first piece of advice for you, the engineer, is to take care of yourself. You are not good to the business if you are not taking care of yourself. You're tired, you're burnt out, you're not thinking clearly. These things don't actually make better outcomes, right? They make worse outcomes. Okay, so here's some advice. I probably should have redid this for these televisions because they were on much bigger screens. Remember, you're not a robot, you're a human. Clear your calendar, trade conflicts away. So this is actually a good piece of advice that you have to remember. It's like if you're about to be on call and you're gonna go to the movies on Friday, probably figure something out there, right? Like, makes sense. Or like you're gonna be on vacation and you're about to go onto an on-call shift. You should have a culture where you can trade things away, find some way to avoid that conflict. You need to understand your backup situation. As a single person, carrying the pager for your entire business, for example, is a heavy, heavy burden. So what happens if you forgot your laptop and went to dinner, or your battery is dead on your MiFi, or whatever it is? What is the backup? What happens whenever you are unavailable? There is a place where that is going to happen. Keep your laptop and phone charged. That's a very simple piece of advice, but also one that's hard to remember and can create some sort of weird, awkward situations. And then monitor. Really, what it's about is monitoring your stress and energy levels. Right? If you're having a rough week, understand what that means. Figure out a way to help bring you back to normal levels. Or if that is not going to happen, then find another solution to the problem, which could be getting someone to take over the rest of your shift, whatever it is. Find a solution to take care of yourself. Okay. So this comes from Alice Goldfuss's on-call handbook. It was a lot more funny when she was in the crowd and she was like, I really like the part where he quoted me. She literally introduced everyone as different Pokemon, and I was 5 wise tales, which I thought was hilarious because I gave a talk about the 5 whys and other lies. But yeah, that made me laugh. So this is from her on-call handbook. On-call can be stressful, whether you're getting hammered with pages or you only got one, but it was at 3 a.m. Getting into a relaxed, sleepy frame of mind can be difficult. So like, know that it has impact, right? Even if you got one alert in the middle of the night, that can affect your entire day. And have some awareness of that and create some sort of shared understanding within your team about what that means. Okay. So this is really the part that is interesting, is I think the best piece of advice I can give to someone who is joining an on-call rotation, be curious. What is that? What is this system over here? Why does it work this way? How can I find out more about it? Because at a time when it's not stressful is the best time to learn about the system. You're going to learn about it in a stressful situation, but you'll probably have to come back to it, right? So this comes from Eli Goldratt's it's essays on the theories of constraints. And it really stems from, if you change the basic assumption, you change the system yourself. So that curiosity of you digging into a system and changing your basic assumption about how it works is that you've actually changed the reliability, the availability story of that system. Okay. So be curious. Be comfortable, or being uncomfortable with a system or a set of systems is useful feedback. Embrace it as an opportunity to learn. Take notes, right? When something is down, is not the best time to ask a bunch of questions. You may have them, and you may need them answered, but there might be a bunch of them that you don't actually need answered. So take a moment, write it down, come back to it later. Read any material you can find on previous incidents. There could be a gold mine of material on things that have happened before. Pair on normal everyday work. This one is huge because it gives you an opportunity to ask someone who is more versed in the system about how it works. And you're just doing normal work. There's no stress. It's a safe place to ask questions. And then don't be afraid to make mistakes. When you put too much energy into eliminating mistakes, you're less likely to gain insights. Having insights is a different matter from preventing mistakes. So this comes from Gary Klein's book, Seeing What Other People Don't. And it's really about insights. It's about how you gain knowledge within the system. And by fearing that you're about to make a mistake, you're actually hampering your ability to gain that knowledge. This one is so critical. Seek to understand the impact. So you as the engineer should know what this alert means for your business. And if you don't, definitely ask questions about it. Question whether it needs to exist at all. And then try to make the connection, right? If a disk fills up on a service that nobody cares about, what impact does that have? Is it a problem? I don't know. So what does this alert mean for our customers? Who do I need to tell about this incident, right? So when you're trying to seek to understand the impact, you may need to tell people about the incident that is going on, whether that's other people within your business or your customers or some third-party vendor that is involved in whatever this sort of shenanigans is. Is something currently sideways? So can you tell if something is actually wrong, right? Is something about to go wrong? Those are the best alerts that you get before something actually goes wrong, and then you can take action to prevent them from going wrong. Not always the thing that's going to happen, but it could. And then is this thing just a dumpster fire that is probably just going to be the way that it is? And that's probably the one that you need to not alert about at all, because at that point in time, someone needs to care about it before it should matter. If the business cares about it, it will get fixed. Broken windows, right? Okay, so here's a live look at the internet. Had an interesting incident today, which reminds me of a live look at the internet. Had a particular CDN vendor decide that it was just going to change its behavior at 3 a.m. and just work differently. And then the service that was using that CDN vendor no longer functioned because of it. And that's the thing, it's out of your control, right? You can't control what happens elsewhere on the internet. My favorite band name that someone should start is BGP and the route leaks, because that's a thing. So, all right. This one comes from Charity Majors directly. I'm a big fan of the nines don't matter if users aren't happy, right? We obsess over uptime, but the uptime doesn't actually matter if our customers are not getting the experience that they need. So it just really comes back to understand the impact of these alerts that you're getting. All right, so let's talk about the team. The team exists as a system to function around on-call, right? On-call is owned by a team. Some on-call rotation is owned by a team. So the best thing you can do is be intentional about how that works, have conversations about how when something goes wrong, this is how it gets handled, all of that kind of jazz, and create systems that are functional and can be changed over time. The one I love the most for bringing somebody new into on-call is the concept of shadowing. So shadowing really is when you are brand new, you can do this a couple of different ways. The way that I prefer to do it is after you've done a little bit of training, somebody knows how to receive an alert, they've been through that kind of concept, you've maybe even done a mock incident, they know what that means. And they've been around long enough to know that like the name of this system means this thing over here. You can put them as the first level on call with somebody who is expected to get all of the pages that they get, and they immediately escalate all of those pages to that person, and then they work through them together. So you're basically pairing on the page that you received. And that's my favorite way to do shadowing. You can do it other ways. You can do as they're the secondary, and then they get sort of an awareness of the pages that are coming in. The other person is driving, and all they're doing is watching. I think it's slightly less, that's sort of what's happening either way, but it's slightly less familiar if you're not the one that's actually being involved in the pages that are coming in. Understand your escalation systems. You should have them. They matter, right? What happens if I left my laptop in the car and walked 10 miles, right? You got to have an escalation system of some kind. So here's how ours works. So we have a level 1, a level 2, and then we have an everybody after that. So what happens whenever level 2 isn't good enough to solve the problem? You go to everyone else who's available that can answer. But basically, they both have schedules. They're different people. And so there is this clear tree of escalations. Remember, expertise is not evenly distributed. This is the thing that makes me sad, because I wish it was. It would be so much easier if we were all just a bunch of robots that all had exactly the same knowledge. But also, we would be super boring and not nearly as effective at what we do. But again, it's not evenly distributed. So the way that you can create some expertise is by reviewing your alerts, right? So even if you're not on call, there's this point in time when you can talk about the things that this person who is on call dealt with while they were on call, and we call that on-call review. So here's our incident review channel. So we use this tool called ReactG Channeler. And it's basically you attach It's Fine Dog to any particular alert that then we're going to review tomorrow, because It's Fine Dog, obviously. And then that alert, we then go through and talk through all of them that show up in this list. So you can see here the meeting started. There's like a Google Calendar invite to the meeting. And then we have there's even somebody replying to a particular one to write notes down, so that you can come back to it, because at 3 a.m. you may not, what you write down at 3 a.m. you may not remember at the next day, right? And then, so basically it's between the two calendar events, those are the things that we go through. And we do this every day. It's just part of how we work. It's part of our stand-up. And it gives us that moment to talk about whether this alert was meaningful, this alert had important value, it told me this was about to happen, so I did that. It gives you that chance to understand whether the things that your system is telling you have value, have impact, and then to create some familiarity for anyone who's not actively on call, right? Because they're in this meeting, they're theoretically listening and engaged in the meeting, and so they can see what's happening. All right, so the org. This is a bit more amorphous, because organizational change is hard, and it's slower, and it's just sort of its own thing. But there's some basic things that matter, right? You need to have an incident response plan. If you don't have an incident response plan, like, what do you actually do in the case of an incident, right? Like, you have one, you just may or may not have it written down in the way that it actually works, or you may have it written down in a completely different way than it actually works, or you may have it fairly well written down to the way that it normally works. That's fine, but you have a plan. The plan exists. Understand it, be able to change it, make adjustments. But then that comes back to, what is an incident? And this is a thing that's really hard to define. Is a single alert that may or may not have any impact to our customers? An incident? Probably not. It may matter from the team's perspective because they care about whether they're getting paged in the middle of the night, but it may not actually be an incident that is important to the organization. So have a way to understand the urgency, the impact, the value of the incident, right? Create your response, Voltron. I like this one. So in these situations where you're in a large incident, let's call it a large incident, and you aren't sure where the problem lies, where the remediation needs to happen, understand how to get a hold of more people who have more expertise in those particular systems. And then also, if you need to communicate to your customers, bring in people who are good at that, right? As a random engineer on a team, you may be done it before, but it's probably not your wheelhouse, right? So understand how to bring in people that will add value to the particular incident and create the best experience possible. So here's some sage advice. And what I mean by that is this is general advice that I think you should take, and it's fairly universal. Game days, they add value, do them. So game days are, if you're not familiar with the concept of game days, they basically are an opportunity to create an incident of your own in a space that is safe, is the way that I like to describe them. So what you can do is if you have a non-production environment, you can actually inject some failure into that environment and see what happens to your system, see how it ripples through the system. Especially if you have a theory about how you can make an impact in that system, it's probably more useful for you to see how it fails. But the thing that I like about game days the most is you can treat them like production incidents and actually practice your response. You can see how that response in action looks. And as a participant, you can do that in a way that you're not under stress, right? You know that there is no impact to the business because this is happening. So it gives you a chance to learn, to make mistakes, to gain insights, right? Follow the full policy because you're gonna spot flaws in that plan that you might want to change. So I think game days are fun. I'm kind of into them. I gave a talk about them at Chaos Days Twin Cities a few years ago, and I like them. I was also super into Mr. Robot around that point in time, which is coming back for its final season. There's a good NBC plug for you. So watch Mr. Robot. But I bought an F Society mask just to wear while I was trying to cause failure into our systems because I thought it was funny. But yeah, they're fun. I should have brought it over here. It's at my desk. All right. So game days. If you want advice on how to do them, you want more details about what makes a good game day, you want specifics about what running a game day looks like, come talk to me because I have lots of thoughts about that. I don't necessarily need to give the 30-minute talk that I gave before about that right now. But I do want to talk about incident reviews. And I want to talk about them in a way that I think that people make mistakes about how to do them. And so when I mean incident reviews, I'm talking about postmortems. I'm talking about whatever you want to call your after action, your retrospectives, whatever it is you want to call them. Again, these TVs are not great for these slides. So this is from Ryan Franz, somebody who I think is awesome. But he says, consider this: if you find your post-incident reviews are neither compelling nor helping your organization learn, it's likely these reviews simply assemble facts rather than tell stories. We learn best and are engaged more by stories. And so the thing that I think is most important about an incident review is the narrative that document that you generate tells. There are other things that are important, like you're trying to actually find common ground about how you think the system works, and that's part of the meeting process. The storytelling is really part of that like ongoing organizational learning that happens when you create compelling stories of how an incident unfolded that then other people can read and learn from, right? I don't think action items are the most important thing in a postmortem. I actually think they're probably some of the least important things. That might be a little controversial. So the other side of this is there are things to avoid. There are traps that you can fall into whenever you actually do these reviews. And this is from Johan Bergström, who's a professor at Lund University, where there's a master's in safety science program that is a little in vogue in the software world. And so the first trap is counterfactual language. So the thing to avoid in your incident review is talking about a bunch of things that didn't happen. And so a counterfactual is essentially saying that if this would have happened, something else would have happened, right? You're saying if you would have zigged whenever you zagged, you would have had a different outcome. And that doesn't add any value because it's not talking about how the events actually unfolded. It's talking about a bunch of things that may or may not have happened before. And so you might have guessed that I like John Allspaw. I think he's an excellent human. And so he recently tweeted, if you've had a contributing factors section in your post-incident write-ups, see how often it has statements about the absence of something. We didn't have any. There was no, a lack of. These are counterfactual statements where you're talking about a bunch of things that didn't actually happen. And you're not really telling the compelling story by talking about things that didn't happen. So the second trap is normative language. And so this is directly out of the video that first slide is from, is like a 7-minute video. It's pretty great. So the normative language here, insufficient flight crew monitoring of airspeed indications during the approach likely resulted from expectancy, increased workload, fatigue, and automation reliance. So this is normative language. It's talking about things that should have worked differently. So there was insufficient monitoring. There was not enough monitoring. I just took this slide and changed those 4 words, and then it's about software. And so like it's very familiar, right? Like to talk about a bunch of things that didn't happen the way that they were supposed to, that like somebody should have done something different, that did not meet an expectation, that the system behaved in a way that you didn't, that was not the way that it should have expected. You should have expected. And normative language is pretty harmful, especially as someone who is involved in an incident. It can be pretty painful to talk about things that like were the norm that should have happened that actually didn't. Yeah, I have feels about that. I'll also talk about that later if anybody wants to. Okay. So the next trap is mechanistic reasoning. And so mechanistic reasoning is really talking about how for something to go wrong, there's a malfunctioning component that malfunctioned, and if you replace that component, you will then have a working system. And so that's a sort of a not how complex systems work. Complex systems are made up of failures that are happening all over the place. They're in a degraded state from start to finish. And so there's lots and lots and lots of things going on, and those components never actually function. The mechanistic view is that all of the components work. It's only when one of them doesn't work that something goes wrong. And that's actually not how complex systems fail. So I think of it like a car, right? Your car battery dies, you replace it. That is a valid way to troubleshoot a car. Cars are not complex systems unless you include computers, but let's pretend that they're not involved. And so like the actual mechanical parts of a car, you can replace the individual pieces, and mechanistic reasoning actually works. So this comes from Carl Horsley, who's in the safety sciences world, and he's talking about safety is increased by increasing the reliability of an individual. So false assumption number 1, he goes on to list a bunch of other ones in this thread, it's great. But safety is increased by increasing the reliability of an individual, of the individual system components. If the components do not fail, then accidents will not occur. That's just simply not true, right? Like, you can add as much robustness to your system as you would like. You can have as many 9s as you think you can have. But that's actually not how systems fail. They don't fail because you didn't add enough robustness. They fail because that's just the natural state of how they work as complex systems. So those are the 3 traps. Incident reviews are complex. They're an important part of organizational learning, and knowing how to create a safe space to have real dialogue about the failures that happened without having to worry about like trying to cover your ass matters a lot. And so that's why those traps are such an easy thing to fall into, because they exist with the benefit of hindsight to be like, that happened because of this thing, and so it wasn't my fault because that was what happened. But trying to shirk blame or even lay blame then prevents you from thinking about the bigger picture, the system, the interactions that are happening throughout the system. So these ideas are not my own. They come from all these places. There's a bunch of references to the slides that I mentioned. The field guide to understanding human error is actually the thing that sort of kickstarted my nerdery around all of this stuff. So it's a book by Sidney Dekker. It's about airline crashes and train wrecks and that kind of stuff. But it actually talks about how human performance is not a byproduct of creating a safe culture. Human performance is the thing that creates safety. And so it kind of changes your perspective on you're not trying to prevent people from making mistakes. You're trying to enable people to create that safety themselves. And then Lauren Holstein works at Netflix. The counterfactuals tweets that John Allspaw had was in reference to Lauren's blog post. It's great. It's pretty short, but it gives a little more detail on the dangers of counterfactuals. And because I was at DevOps Days Portland, there's a Portlandia reference at the end. Take questions? Sure. If anybody has any questions, you can definitely come and talk to me.
Do you want to?
Matt.
So I think a common response to people saying don't use counterfactuals is somebody's well, how are we going to know what to do right if we don't talk about what should have happened? So how do you guide people away from that sort of logic?
So again, that's why the question to summarize is how do you reframe the conversation around counterfactuals, because the way that you figure out what to do right is by looking at what was wrong. Did I rephrase that? Yeah, okay. And so I think that's why it's a trap, right? It's because that's actually it seems like an intuitive way to think about it, because right and wrong, that's what you're looking for. But in complex systems theory, failure and success are the same thing. They're not there's no really difference between failure and success in complex systems. And so you kind of have to rephrase the whole conversation to be we are not in a binary choice situation here, right? There are a lot of things that went into the thing that made up this failure mode, right? And so if you highlight so the way that I tend to defend that, talk about any of the other things that went wrong that were well, if that would have went right, then that wouldn't have mattered, right? Because that's as a way to have a conversation to expand someone's thought on how to fight against why counterfactuals are a bad thing. You can sort of highlight how easily these other things could have also gone right, and then that thing wouldn't have mattered either. I don't know. Yes.
Sure, I'll ask my question into the mic. If people work someplace where on-call is kind of blameful, and this I'm not speaking about myself because I'm not actually on call right now, yay. But if someone is on call and they work someplace where on call is kind of blameful and they want to try to change the way people at their organization think, what would you, I mean, I'm not sure if giving them a giant list of links to read is a good place to start. Like, what's the 1 or 2 things they should do to start?
So, I think that's a really great question. I think it is hard, and that's sort of like the resilience engineering group. I think gets a little bit of a bad rap because like there's a lot of like super academic folks in it, which, like I said, I'm sort of pseudo that and pretend to be, and so like it's hard to get started. But I think there is that complex systems failure paper, really short. Richard Cook also gave this amazing talk on the same concept. So it's literally called How Complex Systems Fail at Velocity like 5 years ago or something. That is great. Richard Cook is he is an amazing human being, and he has a very an awe-inspiring way of describing complex systems in a way that people can understand them. There's other great talks. Another good resource is the Etsy debrief guide that they created 3 or 4 years ago. It's on the internet. It's really just about like how to actually do postmortems in a non-blameful way. If you're struggling with like how to change the culture of your organization, that's hard. That takes a lot of time. It takes highlighting some of those traps and where those traps can actually impact the way that your organization functions, can actually prevent you from learning things that you would have learned otherwise. And so that's the thing that you're looking for, is like ways to sort of highlight that point. And so like, I mean, again, I did lots of reading, but you know, there's great sources. There's several other, I listened to Todd Conklin's pre-accident investigations podcast like pretty regularly. He's pretty great at giving like just sort of like 2-minute nuggets that he calls safety moments, where he's talking about like how to create that like the new view safety culture, the culture around humans are a power to be harnessed, not something to be controlled, and that sort of like frame change then opens up the rest of this stuff, I think. Other questions? Ben.
What does your ideal on-call rotation look like? Like who's on call, when, how long, what's the role of the organization?
So the question was, what does the ideal on-call rotation look like? Who's on call, when, and how long? What's their role? Ah, boy. That's a loaded question. I have a bunch of coworkers in the room. You know, I think that on-call is going to be tough no matter what that looks like. And I think all of these things sort of apply, which is why I avoided that particular piece. And like a lot of that depends on your organization, right? It depends on the needs. It depends on your availability requirements. It depends on like, if you lose millions of dollars if you're down for minutes, right? Like that stuff matters and affects this, right? So it's hard to make that. I don't think that one person should be on call for more than a week, because I think that that's too long. I don't think that you can reasonably hold that burden for much longer than that without a break. And I think Alice said something at DevOps Days that I think is Minneapolis, that I think is absolutely true. An on-call rotation with less than 4 people is untenable, and I think that is absolutely accurate, because if you only get 2 weeks off after you've been on call for a week, that is not enough time to recover, especially in situations where you're sort of getting saturated. And what happens when you get saturated is then you're always on call all the time, because you're trying to figure out how to trade that responsibility with the other people involved, and you're just trying to keep the ship from sinking, right? And that's not a place that you want to be. But aside from that, like, I mean, it's generally subscribe to you build it, you run it, but that's yeah. I think I saw another question. Yes, Donnie.
I'm curious what you've seen or heard about how much larger companies handle this kind of approach. Maybe they have dedicated SRE group or that kind of thing, where it's not quite on call weeks. So that might be a little bit different. Maybe that works with escalation or what.
Yeah, so Donnie's asking about how large organizations handle this, and I think the classic is follow the sun. So if you have people like throughout the globe as part of your organization, like let people get sleep and let the other people that are awake handle it in that particular sense. I think that would be an ideal world if that was a thing that you felt was the best thing for your organization, in that like you had even keel expertise and like could handle all of that stuff. And so like these are ideals, and no ideals exist in reality. But and then I mean it comes down to like how many systems do you think a person can reasonably hold in their head, and how do you divide that up into a way that like is most effective. I think a person can hold probably more than they think they can hold in their head, but there is some limit there that's definitely there. Other questions? Yes.
So I've always been on the best teams ever, but you're on-call rotation, right? You have 4 people, so which is very minimal, right? Or 5. And you find out that 2 of them aren't competent. I know it's probably a loaded question. And the 3 don't trust the 2, and then it turns into basically 3 people on call. How do you deal with that situation? And that can happen with every kind of.
Yeah. So the question, and I'm gonna try and use your words exactly, is you're in an on-call rotation with 5 people, and you realize that 2 of them aren't competent. Those are the words that you used. And how do the 3 people who then are on call, or are then basically on the hook to be on call, how do they handle it? So yeah, that comes from, I feel like I have lots of questions that I want to ask you, but probably not in front of a bunch of people. Yeah, so like from a generic piece of advice, I would question why you think they aren't competent, because somehow they were hired to do the job that they're doing in some fashion. And I think I would use that to try and figure out where, so Don Norman in Design of Everyday Things likes to talk about affordances, and as a user of the system, which an on-call engineer is absolutely a user of the system in some fashion, right? That system could be literally the thing that pages them, but it also is the rest of the stuff too. And so it might be like, well, what is missing for this person that that I can make that connection, but they can't? Because like that could happen to anyone else too, right? It's not just necessarily them. It could be. I mean, the other person that you said was incompetent. But so use that as a way to like try and understand your system more and find different perspectives on how it works. I guess I don't know. Other questions? Yes. Yes. So the question was, you talked about reviewing your alerts in the stand-up. Is it just a, hey, quick, like, here's the alerts that went off, or can sometimes your stand-up turn into an hour? And yes. So the answer to that is both. I think what's interesting is that actually allows you to adapt, right? So it gives you that like level of, okay, we need to go deep into what this is about, because clearly someone doesn't understand something, or this system is going in a place that we don't want it to go. It's one of those things, right? And so it gives you an opportunity to try and dig into that and really like learn more about what's going on. Again, logistics of that don't necessarily work all the time. We've literally like built our stand-up ceremony around. So we're split into 2 squads. There's 12 of us. We're split into 2 squads. One squad is before the on-call review. One squad is after the on-call review. Each for all 3 of them are 15 minutes, and that generally works. Like I would say for most times it works. Occasionally it doesn't, and then we have to figure out what to do otherwise. But flexibility, I think, is meaningful, especially in like it's better than getting more pages, I guess. So yeah.
Yeah, I was on Notify, and you also mentioned Pine Dog, but like, what are the tools that you guys utilize for managers?
So the question was, we saw Notify and its Find Dog. Yeah. What other tools? Do you mean like how do we act and respond and like those types of things? Or so we use PagerDuty for all of our alerting. We use Datadog, New Relic, Splunk, all kinds of the like sort of tools to like understand what's going on in the middle of an incident, as well as to send us pages and stuff. And then we use status page IO to do status page updates and stuff. If that was what your question was about, cool. Yeah. Other questions? Cool. Yeah, definitely come talk to me if you have anything else that you don't necessarily want everyone else to have the conversation about. Thanks.